Good morning. We're in John chapter 1, verse 15 to 18. It's a long passage, and so we're going to kind of zip through this, all right? But first, we're going to look at verse 14 from last week as a review. And so let's get started. Verse 14, it says, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. We saw his glory, glory as of the only begotten from the Father, full of grace and truth." If you remember, the Word here is he existed in the beginning. He was with God, he was God, and he created all things, and nothing uh, existed apart from him. And so the Word is God. That's the claim here. And the Word became flesh. And John says, we saw him, we saw the Word, and we saw his glory, meaning that we saw that he was God, right? And that's verse 14. So we go into verse 15. It says, "John testified about him and cried out, saying," okay, this is John the Baptist. Right off the bat, I see two main verbs here, testified and cried out. It's John the Baptist. This is what he did. He testified and he cried out. And it's these two verbs are joined together by this conjugation and so I'm going to show this with a line. Okay. Two thoughts, or really one thought. It's testified and cried out, and this is what John the Baptist was saying. It says, "This was he of whom I said, he who comes after me has a higher rank than I, for he existed before me." Okay, so the meat of what John the Baptist was saying and telling his followers, because John the Baptist had a huge following. People all over Israel came to hear John. And his message was that someone who's ranked higher is going to come after me. And it's the Word. The reason why he is ranked higher, the word "for" here tells us the reason, is because this guy who comes after me, he existed before me, says John. Now, as you know, John the Baptist is referring to Jesus. And he says Jesus existed before me, that he is in a higher rank than me. As you know, John was born before Jesus. And yet here is John saying Jesus existed before me. You might also recall that John the Baptist is a relative of Jesus, right? Elizabeth and Mary, their mothers, they knew each other. They were relatives. They talked to each other. Okay, and so it's not too far to assume that John, growing up, he saw Jesus. And yet his testimony is that Jesus is God because he existed before me, he says. It's pretty hard to claim a relative, someone you saw, that you grew up with, and to claim that relative as God. But here is John the Baptist. He says Jesus is God. All right, what an awesome thing. Let's go on. Verse 16 here. It says, "For of his fullness we have all received grace upon grace." So we're going to go ahead and separate these sentences here. It says, "For of his fullness we have all received." So when Jesus came, they saw him, they received him, and his description of it all is grace upon grace, right? So what does that mean, grace upon grace? Well, it's explained by verse 17. So we'll skip to verse 17 now. All right. It says, "For," here's the reason, right, of grace upon grace. It says, "For the law was given through Moses, and grace and truth were realized through Jesus Christ." Okay. So here's the explanation of the first grace. All right. The law is being referred to here. The law was grace for any Israelite, for a Jew. When they thought of the law, it was God's grace, it was God's love. That's why he gave the Israelites the law, because God loved and gave grace to his people. Okay? But now through Jesus, who is the fulfillment of the law, he is the greater grace, right? Because he fulfills the law. And so John the Apostle, he is explaining how as they saw Jesus and how Jesus fulfilled the law, they experienced grace upon grace. I hope that's clear. Let's go on. It says, no one has seen God at any time. The only begotten God who is in the bosom of the Father, he has explained him. Right? So in this first line here, no one has seen God at any time. It causes a problem, right? This issue. No one's seen God, have you? No, I haven't, says John. But when you looked at Jesus, Jesus explains God. Jesus shows who God is. That's what John wants us to know in verse 18. No one's seen God, but now, through Jesus, we have seen God. We know God. We can know God. Why? Because he's the unique one. He is God who has come from the bosom of the Father, which indicates how close he is with the Father, that he is God. And that is our passage. So I want to encourage you this morning. You spent time looking into the Word, and you're spending time meditating in Christ. You are experiencing him. The more we look to him and meditate and consider his words, we're looking at God. We're knowing and we're understanding him. May you be blessed. May you put your hope and faith in Christ this week and experience him more. Have a great week. Bye.